The sound a leather glove makes across a man's face is smaller than you would think. It is not a crack of thunder. It is a flat, ugly little clap, and in the long gallery of Harrogate that afternoon it carried the whole length of the room because there was nothing else moving to cover it. Not a footfall, not a cough, not the scrape of a chair. I heard it from 30 paces, standing beside the tall east windows with the household ledgers still open under my arm, and I felt it in my teeth. My name is Nolan Frey. For 19 years I have been controller of the household of the Royal House of Harrogate, which is a grand way of saying that I keep the rolls, the standing orders, the wages, the seating, the sealed cupboards, and the 10,000 small rules by which a palace does not fall into chaos. I am not a soldier. I have never drawn a weapon in anger. My weapons are ink and precedent, and I tell you that plainly at the start so you understand that when I say the Queen Consort crossed a line that day, I am not speaking of manners. I am speaking of law. She struck a guardsman of the household who was standing his lawful post, and then, before she had even lowered her hand, she began to lie about it. What followed was the most extraordinary reckoning I have witnessed in 19 years of service, and it is the reason I set it down now, while the details are still sharp, and the men who lived it are still alive to correct me if I stray. The guardsman's name was Silas Vale. He was standing where he had stood every third day for the better part of 2 years, at the double doors of the late Queen Isolde's private apartments, on the gallery landing above the state stair. Red tunic, brass buttons polished to a low fire, tall black bearskin, white gloves, the ceremonial rifle at his shoulder, his chin strap set, his eyes fixed on the middle distance as a guard's must be. He was not a large man, Vale middling height, a plain square face, the kind of man you would pass in the street and not remember. But there was a stillness to him that made the eye come back. He held his post the way an old wall holds a hill, without effort, without complaint, as though the two of them, the man and the doorway, had grown together. The doors behind him had been sealed since the night Queen Isolde died. That is the first thing you must understand, because everything turns on it. Isolde, the king's first wife, the mother of Crown Prince Rowan, beloved in the realm in a way that no proclamation can manufacture, had spent her last strength setting her affairs in order. She had written her testament, sealed it with her own signet, and given a standing order for her apartments, that the rooms be closed, the seal unbroken, and a guard posted, and that the doors open again only at the hand of King Alaric himself or of the king's sister, Princess Adela. The king had countersigned that order with his own seal. I had entered it into the standing rolls in my own hand. It was, in the plainest sense the word allows, the king's command that those doors stay shut. The Queen Consort, Morwenna, did not like locked doors in her palace. She had come to Harrogate 3 years past, the king's second wife, and she had come with a great deal of appetite and a son and a daughter of her own, Lord Cassius, oily and clever, and Lady Verena, who smiled the way a knife catches light. Morwenna wore the consort's coronet as though it were a wager she had won and meant to spend before anyone could call the bet. She rearranged the seating. She dismissed servants who had served the late queen and replaced them with her own. And more than once in the 2 years I speak of, she had walked to those sealed doors, looked at the plain guardsman standing before them, and asked, sweetly at first, then less so, to be let inside. Each time the answer was the same. Vale would incline his head the exact respectful degree the rules required and say, in a level voice, "The apartments are sealed by the king's standing order, madam. They open at his majesty's hand or the Princess Adela's." And each time she had turned away with her jaw tight, because even a queen consort cannot simply overrule the king's own seal, not while the household watches, not while the controller stands there with the roll that proves it. That afternoon she decided she was done being turned away. I did not see the beginning of it, only the end, and I have since pieced the beginning together from a dozen honest witnesses. She had come up the state stair in full state, coronet, court gown, her ladies trailing, Lord Cassius a half step behind with that soft smile of his. The king was 3 days' ride away at the coast, receiving a delegation from a neighboring court. The crown prince rode with him. The palace, in the way of palaces when the master is absent, held its breath and ran on habit. Morwenna had chosen her moment. She came to the landing, she faced the sealed doors, and she gave the guardsman his order. "Stand aside." "The apartments are sealed by the king's standing order, madam," Vale said. "They open at his majesty's hand or the Princess Adela's. I cannot stand aside." "You can and you will," she said. "I am your queen." "You are the Queen Consort, madam, and I honor you as such." He said it without heat, without insolence, the way a man reads a line he has read 100 times. "But the king's standing order names the king and the princess. It does not name me a door I may open, and it does not name you a hand that may open it. I am sorry." It was the sorry that did it, I think. She was a woman who could bear defiance more easily than pity. To be told I am sorry by a common guardsman, in front of her ladies and her son, as though he were the one granting her a mercy, that lit something in her that had been laid ready for a long time. She stepped up close to him, close enough that her ladies drew back, and she pulled off one long white glove, and she struck him across the face with it. That was the sound I heard. The glove caught him high on the cheek and knocked the chin strap askew and left a red mark that anyone standing near could see. His bearskin did not shift. His rifle did not move from his shoulder. He turned his eyes back to the middle distance and let his face be struck and did nothing at all, because a guard on his post does not raise his hand to the person he is sworn to protect, not even when she is the one doing the striking. That is the whole of the discipline in a sentence. He stood there and took it and stayed exactly what he was. And then this is the part I will remember to the end of my life. She rounded on her ladies and on the gathering crowd of clerks and courtiers drawn by the noise, and she cried out, "You saw it. You all saw it. He laid his hands on me, he struck the queen." I confess I did not understand her at first. I had watched the whole of it from the windows. He had not moved. The mark was on his cheek, not hers. But I saw Lord Cassius step smoothly forward and take his mother's arm and say, in a carrying voice, "Steady, madam. You are shaking, the brute has hurt you." And I saw Lady Verena press the back of her hand to her mouth as though to stifle a sob, and I understood, cold all the way down, what was being built in front of me. They were making a story. In the space of 10 heartbeats, they were turning a struck guardsman into an assaulted queen, and there were 40 people on that landing who had seen the truth and would, most of them, find it very convenient to remember the lie. "Seize him," Morwenna said. "Seize him and confine him. I will have him flogged in the forecourt at dawn and dismissed in disgrace, and I will have the doors he was so careful to guard open this very hour." She turned her painted, furious face to the crowd. "Let it be known what happens to a servant who raises his hand to his queen." 2 men of the guard came up the stair at Cassius's gesture. I knew them both. One was young Halloway, decent and out of his depth. The other was a hard, ambitious sergeant named Dunmore who had attached himself to Cassius's coattails the way barnacles attach to a hull. They came up onto the landing and they hesitated, because whatever else they were, they had eyes, and they had seen the mark on Vale's cheek and the glove still in the queen's hand. For one long moment, the whole thing hung in the balance on the honesty of 2 ordinary men. "You heard the queen," Cassius said softly, "or would you like to be flogged beside him?" Dunmore moved first. He took Vale's rifle. Vale let it go, opening his white-gloved hands from the stock with a slowness that was its own kind of dignity, and he took him by the arm. Vale did not resist. He looked for just a moment not at the queen or at Cassius, but at me across the length of the gallery, and I have thought a great deal since about what was in that look. It was not fear. It was not appeal. It was something closer to remember this asterisk. A man asking a keeper of records to keep the record. Then they took him down the stair and out of sight, and Morwenna turned back to the sealed doors with triumph on her face, and I closed the ledger under my arm very carefully, and I understood that my afternoon, and, As it turned out, the next 3 days had just become the most dangerous of my career. Because here is what she did not know, standing there in her triumph. I had the roll. I had the standing order in my own hand, with the late Queen's seal and the King's counterseal upon it. And a controller who keeps his rolls honestly is a small, dull, unarmed man right up until the moment when the truth is worth more than any weapon in the palace. And then he is the most dangerous man in it. She had struck a guardsman. She had lied about it in front of 40 witnesses. And she had, without knowing it, put her hand against the King's own seal. She thought she had won a squabble on a landing. She had started a war she could not win, and she had chosen, for her enemy, the two most patient forces in the world. A disciplined man who would not lie to save himself, and a written law that did not care one whit for the anger of a queen. I did not sleep that night. I want to be honest about the fear, because I think the men who write these accounts too often make themselves out braver than they were. I was afraid. I was a clerk in an absent king's house, and the Queen Consort had just demonstrated that she would manufacture a crime out of nothing and find witnesses to swear to it. If she would ruin Silas Vale for standing at a door, she would ruin Nalin Frey for holding a roll. I sat in my small office off the counting room with a single candle and the great standing order book open before me, and I read the entry for the late Queen's apartments over and over, as though the words might change if I looked away. They did not change. Sealed by order of Her Majesty Queen Isolde, countersigned by His Majesty King Alaric, to be opened at the hand of His Majesty or of Her Royal Highness Princess Adela, and no other, a guard of the household to be posted continually. It was as plain as law can be made. And beneath it, in the margin, in the late Queen's own faded hand, a line I had copied but never fully weighed until that night. What is within is for the children's sake. Let no one open it who does not love them. For the children's sake. I sat with that a long while. Queen Isolde had been dead 2 years. Her son Rowan was crown prince, grown and married to the gentle Princess Alara, and it was Rowan and Alara's 3 little ones who ran laughing through the lower gardens. Malin, who was 9 and grave beyond her years, Torin, 11, who wanted more than anything to be a soldier, and small Bram, who was 6 and afraid of the dark and adored, of all the people in that vast palace, the plain guardsman at the top of the state stair. Whatever the late Queen had sealed in those rooms, she had sealed it for them. And Morwenna wanted it open tonight, with the guard removed and the King away, before anyone could stop her. Which meant that whatever was behind those doors was something the Queen Consort was very afraid the King, or the Princess Adela, or the children themselves, might one day see. I did not know yet what it was, but I knew, sitting there with my one candle, that the flogging she had ordered for dawn was not really about a struck queen at all. It was a means to an end. She needed Vale broken and disgraced so that no one would believe a word he said, and she needed the doors open before the King rode home. The false charge and the sealed room were the same crime wearing 2 faces. And I was the only man awake in that palace who could prove it. So I did the first small brave thing, which is usually the hardest. I took a clean sheet, and I made a true and dated copy of the standing order, word for word, seal marks noted, and I copied beneath it the late Queen's marginal line. I made 3 copies. One I hid in the counting room, behind the loose panel where old controllers have hidden things since before my time. One I sewed into the lining of my own coat. And the third I would need to place into the hands of the one person in the realm whose seal could answer the King's own. I would need to reach Princess Adela before Morwenna reached the doors. That, it turned out, was the difficulty. Princess Adela was not in the palace. She had gone north to her own estate at Ravensmere a week before, to see to the autumn accounts of her lands, and Ravensmere was 2 days hard riding away. The King was 3 days south at the coast. Morwenna had not chosen this week by accident. She had waited until the only 2 people who could lawfully open those doors, or lawfully answer for a household guard, were both a long way off, and she had struck the moment the palace was hers to command. But a palace is never truly one person's to command, and this is a thing that the arrogant forget over and over, in every generation. A palace runs on the small loyalties of hundreds of unremarkable people, the courier who knows the fast road, the cook who has fed the same children for years, the old chamberwoman who dusted the late queen's rooms and wept at her funeral. Morwenna commanded the coronet. She did not command the loyalty. She had spent 3 years being sharp with the servants, and now, on the night she needed the servants to be blind and deaf, they were neither. I went first to the courier's lodge by the Mews. The head courier was a leathery man named Gower who had carried the late queen's letters for 20 years and had no love at all for the new consort. I told him plainly what had happened on the landing, the struck guard, the false cry, the flogging set for dawn, the doors to be opened. I did not embroider it. Gower listened with his arms folded and his mouth getting thinner and thinner. "They took Vale then," he said when I finished. "It was not a question. The one who stands at her late Majesty's door, the one small Bram won't sleep without saying good night to. They took him, and she means to have him flogged and turned out at first light and the doors open tonight." Gower spat once precisely into the straw. "What do you want of me, Comptroller?" "2 riders, your fastest and most trustworthy. One north to Ravensmere with a sealed letter for the Princess Adela into her own hand, no other. One south to the coast to the king, tonight, before the gates are watched if they are not watched already." He looked at me a long moment. We both knew what we were doing. To send secretly past the Queen Consort, to summon the king home over her head if she prevailed, if the story she was building held, we would both hang for it, courier and clerk alike, conspirators against the crown. If she prevailed. Everything always came back to that if asterisk. "Write your letters," Gower said. "I'll have them away within the hour and I'll carry the north one myself. I owed her late Majesty more than I ever paid." He turned to saddle his horse and then stopped and added, over his shoulder, in a lower voice, "Vale carried Bram on his shoulders through the frost fair last winter, when the boy's own nurse had lost him in the crowd. Found him crying by the chestnut cellar and carried him home a mile on his shoulders and never said a word about it after. I'll not see a man like that flogged for a lie. Write fast." So I wrote fast. 2 letters, each with a true copy of the standing order folded within, each telling the plain sequence of what I had seen with my own eyes from the east windows. I sealed them with the Comptroller's seal, which is a small authority but a real one, and I gave them to Gower. And within the hour 2 riders went out through the tradesmen's gate into the dark, one north, one south, while the Queen Consort's people watched the great state gates and saw nothing. It was not enough. 2 days at least before Adela could come, 3 before the king. And Morwenna meant to be through those doors tonight. I went back up to the palace proper, and I found that she had not, in fact, gotten through them yet, and I began to understand that the guardsman's discipline had done more than protect his own honor. It had bought us time. Because a sealed royal door is not a thing you simply push open. The late queen's apartments had been locked with the household's own great lock, and the key to that lock did not hang on any ring. By long custom it had been broken in 2 at the ceiling, half held by the Comptroller, which is to say by me, and it was at that moment sewn into the same coat lining as the copied order, and half rendered down. To open those doors without the proper key, Morwenna would need a locksmith and a good one, and time, and she would need me to look the other way about a great many things, because the moment that lock was forced, the forcing became part of the record, and the record was mine. She summoned me near midnight. She had established herself in the king's own audience chamber, which was itself a kind of insolence, seated in a tall chair that was not quite the throne, but was placed where the throne's shadow fell. Cassia stood at her right hand. Lady Verena sat to one side, embroidering, or pretending to. Sergeant Dunmore stood by the door with Vale's confiscated rifle held stiffly across his body as though it were a trophy. And ranged about the room were perhaps a dozen of the household, some of Morwenna's own people, some frightened neutrals who had been summoned to witness, and to be reminded who held the palace tonight. "Controller Frey," Morwenna said, "you keep the standing orders." "I do, madam." "Then you will strike one from the roll for me tonight and enter another." She smiled. It was a practiced smile, and underneath it she was watching me the way a cat watches a hole. "You will strike the order sealing the late Queen's apartments. It has served its term. 2 years of mourning is enough for anyone, and you will enter a new order, dated today, opening those rooms to my authority as mistress of this household in the King's absence. And you will enter the confinement and sentence of the Guardsman Vale for his assault upon my person, so that the record is clean and complete when His Majesty returns and finds his household well governed in his absence." She spread her hands. "You see how much I value good record-keeping, Controller. I could have simply had the doors broken. Instead, I do the thing properly, through the proper officer. Through you." She thought she was flattering me. She thought, I believe, that a man who cared about roles and precedent could be bought with the suggestion that his roles and precedent mattered, that I would be so pleased to be treated as necessary that I would sign whatever she liked. It is a particular blindness of powerful people that they cannot imagine a man valuing the asterisk content of the thing he guards more than his own comfort or advancement. She looked at me and saw a clerk who wanted to be flattered. She did not see at all that she was talking to a man who had spent 19 years believing that the standing rolls of Harrogate were something close to sacred, that the whole fragile order of the place, the thing that kept a palace from becoming a den of exactly this sort of midnight seizure, lived in those books and in the willingness of the man who kept them to keep them honestly. "Madam," I said, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt, "I cannot strike that order." The room went very still. "You cannot asterisk," she repeated. "The order sealing the late Queen's apartments bears 2 seals, Her late Majesty's, and, more to the point, His Majesty King Alaric's own counterseal. It is not a mourning custom, madam, that I might strike when the mourning is judged sufficient. It is a standing command of the reigning king. Only the king may strike the king's command from the roll, or the Princess Adela, to whom the order gives express authority. I have no power to strike it, and neither." I said the next words carefully, because I knew what they cost, "with the greatest respect owed to your station, neither do you. Were I to strike it at your word, I would be forging the abolition of the king's own order, and both of us would answer for it to His Majesty when he returns." I watched that land. I watched Cassius's smooth face tighten. I watched Verina's needle stop. And I watched Morwenna understand, for the first time that night, that the small, dull instrument she had reached for was not going to bend in her hand. "You are refusing me," she said. "I am telling you what the law of your own household is, madam. I would tell the king the same, in the reverse case. It is the only value I have to this house, that the roll says the same thing whoever asks it." For a moment I thought she would strike me too. Her hand actually rose an inch off the arm of the chair. Then Cassius bent and murmured something in her ear, and her hand settled, and her smile came back, thinner now, colder. "Very well," she said. "You are a scrupulous man, Controller. I admire scruple. I shall not ask you to strike anything." She let a beat pass. "I shall simply have the doors opened by other means, and you may enter into your precious roll, honestly and after the fact, that the Queen Consort caused the late Queen's apartments to be opened on such and such a night for the good of the household. An honest record of an accomplished fact. That does not offend your conscience, I hope." And there it was, the reasonable-sounding middle path, the trap dressed as a compromise. She would break the doors herself and merely require me to witness it truthfully afterward, and in doing so she would make me part of the deed, the officer of record standing by while the king's command was broken, writing it down, legitimizing it with my pen even as I pretended only to describe it. I understood, in that instant, that a true record can be made to serve a lie if the lie is allowed to become the fact the record describes. If those doors were open tonight, and the contents removed or altered before Adela or the king could come, then no honest roll in the world would put back what was lost. I will record whatever occurs, madam, I said, truthfully, including, if it occurs, the forcing of a sealed royal door against the king's standing command and the names of all present who caused it or permitted it. I let asterisk that asterisk land too. An honest record, as you say. It cuts in every direction. That is rather the point of it. Her eyes went flat. She had offered me a way to be useful and safe, and I had answered by promising to write her name into the account of a crime. From that moment she knew I was against her, and I knew that I had made myself, along with the confined guardsman, a person she needed either to control or to destroy. "Take the Comptroller's keys," she said to Dunmore. "All of them. He is relieved of his office pending the king's judgment on his conduct. Confine him to his quarters." "The keys are the household's, madam, not mine to surrender," I began, but Dunmore was already crossing the room, and there is a point past which a clerk cannot hold a line with words alone against armed men. "They took my ring of keys." "They did not, thank the late Queen's foresight and my own night's work, take my coat, into whose lining the broken half-key and the copied order were sewn. A search of a fussy old controller's pockets turned up nothing but spectacles and a snuff-box. And they marched me down to my own quarters and set a man at the door, and I sat on my narrow bed in the dark and listened to the palace above me and thought, she has the keys now, but not the right key, and she has the officer confined, but not the record, and somewhere out in the night 2 horses are running north and south. Hold, I thought, at the guard at Vale, wherever they had put him. Hold a little longer. Everything we have is time, and every hour you cost her is an hour closer to the road home. I did not yet know how much that plain, silent man was about to cost her. They had put Vale in the old muniment cellar beneath the West Range, a dry stone room with an iron door, used in gentler times to store the deeds and plate of the house. I learned what happened in that cellar over the following days from the man who guarded it, young Holloway, who came to me afterward sick with shame at his own part, and told me everything as though the telling were a penance. I set it down as he gave it to me, because it is the heart of this account. Everything Morwenna did that night was loud, the seizing, the summoning, the declaiming. Everything Vale did was quiet, and the quiet is what won. They wanted a confession, that was the sum of it. Morwenna had 40 witnesses to an event, but 40 witnesses to the truth are a liability when your story is a lie. Some of them would talk when the king came home. What she needed was a paper, a confession in the guardsman's own hand, admitting that he had struck the queen, begging her pardon, submitting to her judgment. A signed confession would do 3 things at once. It would make the lie official, it would discredit anything Vale might later say in his own defense, and it would let her present the whole affair to the returning king as a closed matter, tried and confessed, not worth reopening. Cassius drew the confession up himself, in fine round secretary's hand, and they carried it down to the cellar with a candle and a pen and a promise. The promise was mercy. Sign and there would be no flogging. Sign, and he would merely be dismissed from service and permitted to leave Harrogate quietly with a small purse, to make what life he could elsewhere. Refuse, and the flogging would proceed at dawn in the forecourt before the assembled household, and after it he would be turned out branded a queen striker, with nothing, and no man in the realm would give work or shelter to such a one. It was a shrewd offer. It cost Morwenna nothing, and it gave Vale everything a broken, frightened man wants. A way out that only required him to say a few words were true that were not. Holloway held the candle. He told me Vale read the confession through twice, slowly, moving his lips a little the way a man does who has not had much schooling and has taught himself letters late and treats them with respect. Then he set it down on the little table and folded his white-gloved hands. They had left him his gloves. There is a strange courtesy in these things, and he said, "No." "Just that," I asked Holloway, "only no asterisk." "Only no asterisk at the first. Lord Cassius did most of the talking. He told Vale he was being a fool, that his loyalty was to a dead queen who couldn't reward it and a door that didn't care, that the living queen was offering him his life. And Vale listened to all of it polite, the way he listens to everything. And then he said, Holloway stopped and had to gather himself. He said, "My lord, if I sign this, then the record of this house says a guardsman struck the queen and was justly punished. And the next time a guard stands at a door your mother wants opened, there'll be no wondering whether he'll hold, because he'll know the roll is a thing that can be written by whoever holds the palace for a night. I'll not put my name to that, not to save my back. The whole worth of a guard is that the door means the same thing on the night the king is home and the night he's away. Take that from the door and there's no guard left standing anywhere in the realm, only men in red coats waiting to see who's winning." I have thought about those words many times. They were, in their plain way, the entire argument I had been making to the queen in the language of standing orders and counterseals. But Vale had never seen my rolls, never heard my refusal in the audience chamber. He had reasoned his way to the same place from his own post, alone, in a cellar, with a flogging promised at dawn. Two men, a clerk and a guard, who barely knew each other, defending the same invisible thing from opposite ends of the palace. The idea that a rule must weigh the same for everyone or it weighs nothing at all. That is a thing worth being flogged for if it comes to that. He had decided it was, and he did not raise his voice to decide it. Cassius left the confession and the pen on the table overnight, in case the dark and the cold changed his mind. In the morning the paper was exactly where they had left it, unsigned, and Silas Vale was sitting against the wall with his eyes open, and when they asked him again he said "no" again, in the same even voice, as though no time had passed at all. So Morwenna denied her confession, built her court instead. If she could not have the guard's own word, she would have everyone else's. She convened, on the second day, what she was pleased to call a court of the household, a thing that has no standing whatever in law when the king is absent and unrepresented, but which looked, to the frightened and the ambitious, enough like justice to be dangerous. She sat as its head. Cassius acted as her prosecutor. A tame chaplain sat to lend it the color of solemnity. And into it, one after another, she brought her witnesses to the crime that had not happened. Lady Morwenna went first. I was not there. I was still confined, but half the palace heard of it and told me after, and the accounts agreed. Morwenna stood before her mother's court and testified in a voice that trembled very prettily that she had seen the Guardsman Vale seize the Queen Consort by the arm and strike her a cruel blow, and that she, Morwenna, had feared for her mother's very life. She wept. She was believed by those who wished to believe her and by those who feared not to. Then came the palace surgeon, a soft, frightened man named Otway who owed his post to the consort's favor, and he testified that he had examined Her Majesty and found bruising to the arm consistent with a violent grip. He did not meet anyone's eye while he said it. And then came others, a lady of the bedchamber, a footman, Sergeant Dunmore, each adding a plank to the platform, until the false thing stood up on its own legs and walked around the room as though it had always been alive. By the end of the second day, the court of the household had found the Guardsman Silas Vale guilty of laying violent hands upon the person of the Queen Consort, and had confirmed the sentence, flogging in the forecourt and dismissal in disgrace, to be carried out at dawn of the third day, which was, Morwenna calculated, still a full day before the king could possibly return, even if some meddler had sent word to him. She would have her verdict entered, her guard broken, and her doors opened, all before Alaric's horse came through the gate. And on the evening of that second day, while her false court congratulated itself, I learned at last what was truly behind those doors, and why she had been willing to build all of this to reach them. It was small Bram who told me, though he did not know he was telling me anything. The children had been kept from the whole business as much as could be managed, but children are not so easily kept, and Malin, the grave 9-year-old, had understood far more than the adults credited. It was she who arranged it. She bribed my doorguard with the whole of her secret store of sugared plums, a sum that apparently bought a quarter-hour of blindness. And she brought her small brother Bram down to my quarters at dusk, because Bram had been crying for 2 days and could not be comforted, and Malin, in her grave way, had decided that the Comptroller who kept all the palace's secrets might know how to fix it. They took Vale, Bram told me, his small face blotched. Morwenna says he hurt the Queen, but he didn't asterisk. He would asterisk never asterisk, and they're going to hurt him at the fountain in the morning, and nobody will stop them. He scrubbed at his eyes. He carried me at the Frost Fair. He's not allowed to talk when he's at the door, but he talks to me at bedtime just a little when the others are gone. He told me what's in Grandmother Isolde's rooms. He said it was a secret for when I was bigger, but I think being bigger has to be asterisk now asterisk. I went very still. What did he tell you, Bram? He said Grandmother made it so nobody could take it away. Her letter, the one that says who looks after us if things happen, and her boxes. He said Grandmother didn't trust. The boy dropped his voice and looked at his sister, who nodded gravely, giving him leave. She didn't trust the new queen. She wrote it all down so the new queen couldn't change who looks after us. And Vale said as long as he stood at the door, nobody could change Grandmother's letter, so I mustn't worry because Vale was always at the door. His face crumpled again. But now he's not at the door. And the whole of it came clear to me at last, sitting on the edge of my narrow bed with a weeping 6-year-old's hand in mine. Queen Isolde, dying, had known her husband would marry again, and had guessed the kind of woman a lonely king might marry, and had feared, rightly, as it was turning out for the 3 grandchildren she loved. So she had put it all beyond reach. In those sealed rooms lay her testament, the disposition of her personal fortune, which was very great and was left in trust to the children, and more dangerous to Morwenna than any gold, her formal designation of who should have the care and guardianship of Rowan and Alara's children in any grievous event, and that guardianship, I would have wagered my life, she had given not to the second wife, but to her own trusted sister-in-law, the king's sister, the Princess Adela. As long as that testament lay sealed and safe, Morwenna could never make herself the mistress of those children, or the manager of their fortune. She could scheme and flatter and undermine, but she could not overturn a sealed instrument bearing the late Queen's signet and the King's counterseal, guarded night and day. Unless the seal were broken and the instrument destroyed or altered, while no one who could stop it was near. Unless the guard were removed by disgrace, so that his account of it would never be believed. Unless a court of the household, convened in a lawful-looking hurry, had already established that the guard was a liar and a criminal before he could ever say a word about what he had been guarding, or why. She did not want the doors open for spite. She wanted to burn the late Queen's testament and write herself into its place, and she needed Silas Vale disgraced first so that, when he cried out that the rooms had held a testament naming Adela, the whole world would answer, "That is only the Queen striker, lying to save his skin." The flogging was not the crime. The flogging was the cover for the crime, and it was set for dawn. I stood up in the dark with my heart going like a hammer. 2 children were looking up at me, one weeping, one grave and waiting, and somewhere above us a locksmith was, even then, being brought quietly to the top of the state stair. I could hear it now, faint through the old stones, a tapping, a scraping, the patient sounds of a man working at a great lock that did not want to yield. "Malin," I said, "how much of your sugared plums have you left?" "None," she said. "I spent them all on your door." "Good girl. Then you have already done more for your grandmother's letter than any grown soul in this palace." I was pulling on my seized and returned spectacles, feeling along my coat lining for the shape sewn there, the copied order, the broken half-key. "Now I need you to be braver still, and I need you to do exactly as I say, because I think your grandmother left one more lock on those doors that the Queen Consort does not know about, and I think you and your brothers may be the only ones who can turn it." Because it had come to me, all at once, sitting there, the meaning of that faded marginal line I had copied and never weighed. Let no one open it who does not love them. Isolde had been a careful woman. A woman careful enough to break a key in two and countersign her own order would not have left only a lock of iron between her grandchildren and the person she feared. She would have left something cleverer, and a locksmith at the top of the stair, however skilled, could pick the iron. He could not pick whatever the late queen had hidden behind it. I did not yet know what that second lock was, but the children did. Malin told me, in her flat, grave little voice, once she was certain I could be trusted with it. Her grandmother had called her to her bedside in those last weeks, Malin alone, not the boys, because Malin was the eldest and the steadiest, and had given her a letter, sealed with the queen's own signet, thick and heavy in a child's hand. And she had given her an instruction and had made her repeat it back until it was word perfect, the way you drill a child on the thing that matters most. Keep this hidden. Tell no one you have it. And if ever the day comes that someone tries to open my rooms who is not your grandfather the king or your great-aunt Adela, if ever they take away the guard at my door, then you are to put this letter into Adela's own hand, and no others as fast as ever you can. Not before, not for any lesser thing. Only if they break my door. I've kept it 2 years, Malin said, under the loose board where I keep the plums. I never told anyone, not even Torin. Grandmother said not to. Her chin came up. They've taken the guard away, and there's a man at the door now with tools, so I think today is the day, isn't it? I think it's time to give great-aunt Adela the letter. Only she's at Ravensmere, and I don't know how to send it, and I'm afraid if I try they'll take it. I could have wept, I think, if there had been time. The late queen had seen the whole of it 2 years off. She had not merely locked a door and posted a guard and hoped. She had planted, in the steadiest of her grandchildren, a living instruction that no locksmith could pick and no false court could overturn. If they break my door, fetch Adela. The sealed rooms were the lock everyone could see. The letter in a 9-year-old's keeping was the lock they could not, and it was set to spring at the exact moment Morwenna forced the doors, which was to say, tonight. You were right to wait, and you are right that today is the day, I told her. Gower the courier rode north for Ravensmere last night. He will reach the princess by tomorrow's dusk if his horse holds. But a letter chasing a rider is no good to us. Malin, listen. The letter must not go through any gate the queen watches, and it must not be in your hands if you are searched. Give it to me. I will hide it where they will never think to look, with the household deeds, in the muniment room, in plain and boring sight. And the moment the Princess Adela sets foot in this palace, I will put it into her hand myself and tell her it is from her sister-in-law, and she will do the rest. That is what your grandmother wanted. Will you trust an old controller that far? She studied me for a long moment with those grave eyes, weighing me the way her grandmother must have weighed people. And then she reached into her dress and drew out the letter, worn soft at the edges from 2 years of a child's hiding, the great seal still whole, and she put it into my hands. I had it not an hour before the doors above us gave way. I heard it through the stones, not a crash but a long grinding surrender, the sound of a great lock finally yielding to a patient man with the right tools, and then a triumphant murmur of voices, and then the Queen Consort's laugh. They were inside the late Queen Isolde's apartments. The seal was broken. The king's standing command lay in pieces on the landing floor, and there was nothing at all I could do about it from a locked room in the cellar with a boy weeping against my side, and his sister sitting straight-backed and white. This was the low point. I will not pretend otherwise. For a long black hour that night everything we had done seemed to come to nothing. The doors were open. Morwenna was in the rooms, and I could only imagine her at the late queen's writing cabinet, breaking the inner boxes, spreading the papers, finding the testament, for the room did hold a testament, sealed and formal and genuine, and reading in it exactly what she feared. That Isolde had left the guardianship of the children and the management of their fortune to Princess Adela, and Morwenna nowhere in it at all. I imagined her holding that document to the candle. I imagined it curling and blackening and her face in the light of it, and the thought that, with the guard disgraced and the paper burned and the king a day away, she had won. And I was tempted then, I will confess this, because the whole worth of an honest account is that it does not spare the teller. I was tempted to save myself. A voice in me, very reasonable, very quiet, said, "It is done, Nolan. The seal is broken and you could not stop it. The guard is condemned and you cannot save him. When the king returns, tell the truth of what you saw, yes, but tell it carefully. Tell it in a way that does not put your own neck under the same axe. You are an old man. You have a pension coming. You have already sent the riders. You have already refused to strike the roll. You have done more than most men would. Let the rest lie. Write what you must write and survive." And it was such a sensible voice. It asked me only to bend a little, to be quiet at the right moments, to let the current carry me. That is how the arrogant win, nearly always, not because the honest are cowards, but because at the decisive hour the honest are offered a version of surrender that feels like wisdom. What answered it in the end was not my own courage. It was the memory of a plain man in a cellar folding his white gloves and saying no asterisk over a paper that could have saved his back. If Silas Vale could refuse his one easy road with a flogging waiting for him at dawn, then Nolan Frey could refuse his. I had the true copy of the order sewn in my coat. I had the late Queen's letter to Adela hidden with the deeds. I had 2 children who had trusted me and a courier on the North Road. The doors were open, but the second lock, the letter, the living instruction, had not been touched, because Morwenna did not know it existed. She had broken into the room and seized the copy of the testament that lay within, and she thought that was the whole of Isolde's defense. She did not know that the careful dead queen had made a second wall, and that the second wall was a child's word and an old man's stubbornness, and that both were still standing. So I did not surrender to the reasonable voice. I helped the children back up the servants' stair before my quarter hour of bought blindness ran out, and I sent Malin to keep her brothers close and say nothing, and I sat back down in my locked room and waited for the dawn and the flogging with the letter to Adela safe in the muniment room and a copy of the king's order in my coat, and in my chest, something that had hardened past fear into a flat cold certainty. You have not won. I thought up through the stones at the woman laughing in the dead queen's rooms. You have only made the crime larger and put more of your own name into it. Every hour you spend in triumph is an hour the roads are bringing your reckoning closer. Enjoy the doors. The doors were never the lock. Dawn came gray and cold. They brought Silas Vale up into the forecourt at first light, and they had assembled the household to watch, because the whole point of a punishment like this is that it be seen, that every servant and clerk and guardsman carry away the lesson that the Queen Consort's word made a man a criminal and broke his back for it, and that no one had lifted a hand to stop her. That is what she wanted them to learn. The forecourt of Harrogate is a great cobbled square within the gates, the palace rising on 3 sides, and they had set up the flogging frame near the central fountain where the late Queen's swans still swam, indifferent on the gray water. A crowd of perhaps 200 stood in the cold, servants roused from their beds, guardsmen off duty, clerks, grooms, the whole living body of the house, and they were silent in a way that had nothing of respect in it and everything of dread. Vale walked to the frame between Dunmore and another man without being dragged. He had been 2 days and 2 nights in a stone cellar, and he had not slept and he had eaten little, and still he walked the length of that forecourt with his back straight and his chin level, in his shirt sleeves now, his red tunic taken from him, his white gloves gone, but the bearing did not need the uniform. That was a thing I understood only in that moment, watching him cross the cobbles. We think the discipline is in the tunic and the bearskin, and it is not. It was in the man. Strip him of every mark of his office and march him to a whipping post before the household that had seen him honored, and he walked like a guardsman still, because the guardsman was what he was and not merely what he wore. Morwenna watched from a balcony above the forecourt, wrapped in furs against the cold, Cassius beside her, Verena beside him. She had the testament, or believed she had. She had the verdict. She had the doors. In an hour she would have the guard broken and the lesson taught, and then, before the sun was high, she would be the mistress of Harrogate in fact as well as name, and let the king come home to a household already governed, and a matter already closed. They bound Vale's wrists to the frame. A man stepped up behind him with the lash coiled in his hand. A herald began to read out the sentence of the court of the household, for that the Guardsman Silas Vale did violently and traitorously lay hands upon the sacred person of Her Majesty the Queen Consort, and I stood at the window of my locked cellar room, which looked out at ground level onto the very edge of that forecourt, with my hands flat against the cold glass, and I thought, no rider can come now. It is too late. We were too slow. She has won this after all, and only the king, days hence, can make it mean anything, and by then this man will be flogged and gone. And that was the moment the gate bell began to ring. Not the ordinary bell. The great bell, the one rung only for the arrival of the blood royal, the deep iron note that every soul in Harrogate knows in their bones and had not heard in the weeks the king was away. It rolled across the forecourt and stopped the herald mid-word. 200 faces turned toward the gate. On the balcony I saw Morwenna come to her feet, the furs slipping from her shoulders, her mouth opening. The gates swung, and through them, on a horse lathered white to the chest and blowing hard, her gray traveling cloak black with 2 days' road and 1 night's hard riding, rode the king's sister, Princess Adela, whom no rider could possibly have reached and brought back so soon, unless she had already been on the road, unless something had already told her to come, unless the late queen's careful web had one more thread in it that even I did not know. She did not wait for the horse to fully stop. She came down from the saddle before it had, and she stood in the middle of the forecourt in her road-stained cloak, and she looked at the flogging frame and the bound man and the coiled lash and the 200 silent witnesses, and the woman rising in fury on the balcony above. And when she spoke her voice was not loud, but it went into every corner of that stone square like a blade going into a sheath. "Cut that man down," said Princess Adela. "And someone tell me by whose authority a guard of my late sister's household is bound to a post in the king's own forecourt, while the king is from home." No one moved for the length of a breath. The forecourt seemed to hold itself between 2 powers, the Queen Consort furious on her balcony, and the king's own sister standing road-stained on the cobbles, and every servant in that square was doing the swift silent arithmetic of the powerless. Which of these 2 will I have to have obeyed, an hour from now? It is not a shameful arithmetic. It is how ordinary people survive palaces. But I saw, in that held breath, the answer settle across 200 faces, because when a lie has ruled by fear for 3 days and the truth walks in through the gate at the last hour, people are so relieved to be allowed to be honest again that the relief is almost a sound. The man with the lash stepped back and let it fall to the cobbles. "Cut him down," Adela said again, and this time a dozen hands moved to do it, decent Halloway among the first, glad past speaking to be given a lawful order he could obey with a clean heart. They loosed Vale's wrists from the frame, and he came away from it unhurried, rubbing the blood back into his hands, and he stood, and when Adela looked at him, he inclined his head to her the exact respectful degree the rules required, as though he had not spent 2 nights in a cellar and half a morning bound to a post, as though he were simply a guardsman greeting a princess on an ordinary day. That small correct bow undid something in me. I found I was gripping the bars of my cellar window hard enough to hurt. "Your Royal Highness has no standing here," came Morwenna's voice from the balcony, pitched to carry, sharpened to a point. "This man has been tried and condemned by a court of the household for a violent assault upon my person. The matter is closed and lawful. I will thank you not to interfere in the governance of a house that, in the king's absence, is mine to govern." Adela lifted her head slowly and looked up at the balcony, and I have never seen contempt worn so lightly and so completely. "A court of the household," she repeated. "Convened by whom? Presided over by whom? Prosecuted by whose son? A court of the king's household, madam, has no power to sit at all unless the king sits at its head or names a justice to sit for him, and the king has done neither, being 3 days south with no notion any of this was afoot. You have not held a court. You have held a performance, and dressed it in a court's clothes, and used it to bind an innocent man to a post. She turned from the balcony as though Morwenna had ceased to be worth addressing. Where is the controller of this household? Where is Frey? He keeps the standing orders. He will tell me in 1 minute what 3 days of this woman's theater has tried to bury. Confined, your highness, someone called out. She had him locked in the cellar, that window there, for refusing to strike the king's order from the roll. I will not soon forget the look Adela turned on that cellar window, nor how it felt to be, after 3 days of helpless dark, suddenly seen, the one man in the palace who had kept the record straight, found and named and wanted. Bring him up, she said. Bring him up and give him back his keys. And if any man laid a rough hand on the officer who was doing his sworn duty, that man will answer to me before the morning is out. They brought me up into the light of the forecourt. I had the copy of the standing order out of my coat lining before I had crossed half the square, and I put it into the princess's hands and told her, in the fewest words I could manage, the whole of it, the sealed apartments, the king's counterseal, the Queen Consort turned away at the door for 2 years, the strike with the glove that I had watched from the east windows, the false cry of assault. The confession Vale had refused in the cellar, though it would have saved his back, the sham court. And this morning, the forcing of the sealed doors while the flogging was made ready to be its cover. Adela read the order as I spoke, and her jaw set harder with every line. The doors are open then, she said. She has been into my sister's rooms. Since last night, your highness. I could not stop it, and here I lowered my voice, because not all of the 200 needed to hear this yet. There is more that her late majesty did than seal a door, and the Queen Consort does not know the half of it. Your sister-in-law left something in the keeping of the child Malin, with an instruction 2 years old. I have it safe. It is addressed to your own hand and no other, and by the late Queen's own charge it was to be given you on the very day someone broke into her rooms. That day is today. Will you take it now? I saw the king's sister go quite still. Isolde left a letter for me, she said slowly, against this exact day, and a 9-year-old has been keeping it 2 years. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. She always did think 3 moves ahead of the rest of us. Yes, Frey, give it to me, and send for the children gently and with kindness. They have been frightened enough. I want them safe by me before anything else is said. They fetched the letter from the muniment room, and they fetched the 3 children, and it was small Bram who broke the last of the forecourt's fearful silence, because the moment he was let loose at the top of the steps, he saw Vale standing free and alive by the fountain, and he ran the whole width of that great cold square, and flung himself against the guardsman's legs, and held on and would not let go, sobbing with the particular abandon of a 6-year-old, who has been told for 2 days that a thing he loved was going to be hurt, and has just discovered it is not. And Silas Vale, who had stood 2 years at a door without so much as turning his head, who had taken a glove across the face and a night in a cellar, and a walk to a whipping post without a word. Silas Vale went down on one knee on the cobbles in front of 200 people, and the king's sister, and the furious queen on her balcony, and he put his arms around that small crying boy and held him, and said something low that only Bram heard, and that, more than any argument of law, was the thing that turned the whole household's heart in its chest. You cannot fake that. The 200 saw it. They saw exactly what manner of man Morwenna had called a violent traitor, and exactly what manner of thing had been about to be done at the fountain, and a low sound went through the crowd that was the sound of a lie dying. Princess Adela broke the late queen's seal and read the letter where she stood. I did not see its every word until later, when it was read into the record, but I saw her face as she read, and I saw her lift her eyes once to the balcony where Morwenna stood, and then read on. When she had finished she folded it, and she held it up so the household could see the great signet, and she spoke, and her voice had changed. The anger banked down now into something colder and more formal, the voice of the blood royal pronouncing on a thing that was no longer in any doubt. This is the hand of the late Queen Isolde, sealed with her signet dated in the last month of her life, she said. I will read the whole of it before the king, but I will tell you now what it contains, because you have all been made these 3 days to stand and witness a lie, and you have earned the truth. My sister-in-law foresaw this day. She writes that she did not trust the second marriage her husband would in time make, not the king's heart, which she never doubted, but the woman she believed he would be lonely enough to choose. She writes that she feared for her grandchildren and their inheritance. And so she made her testament and sealed it, and lodged a true and certified copy of it with the king's own registry of wills, so that it could never be destroyed by the burning of any single paper, and she posted a guard, and she gave a letter to a child, all against the one day she was sure would come, the day the Queen Consort would try to open her rooms. Adela's eyes went up to the balcony again. She names the guardianship of Rowan and Alara's children in any grievous event to me. She names the management of their fortune to me and to trustees of the registry. And she writes, I will read you her exact words if my rooms are ever forced. Look first to whoever profited by removing the guard, for that is the hand behind it. The silence that followed was total. You have burned a paper, madam, Adela said up to the balcony almost gently. I have no doubt you have. I dare say by now the testament you found in my sister's cabinet is ash on her cold hearth. But you burned the copy. The original of a will, once certified and lodged with the king's registry, stands though every copy in the realm be destroyed. You have committed the crime and gained by it exactly nothing, nothing except the proof in your own deeds of everything my sister-in-law wrote you would do. She turned to the household. The doors were forced last night. Who forced them and at whose order? Speak. There is no court of the household this morning and no queen's justice to fear. There is only the king's law, and the king's law protects the man who tells it the truth. They spoke. Once the first one found the courage, they came in a flood, for a household that has been made to swallow a lie is desperate to be sick of it. The locksmith, ashen, admitted he had been brought up the state stair at the Queen Consort's own command and made to force the great lock, and that Lord Cassius had stood over him while he did it. 2 of the ladies who had witnessed the assault on the landing broke and confessed they had seen no such thing, that the guard had never moved, that it was Her Majesty who had struck him, that they had been afraid to say so. And then, most damning of all, came the palace surgeon Otway, gone the color of tallow, who fell to his knees on the cobbles and cried out that he had examined no bruise at all, that there had been no bruise to examine, that he had been commanded to certify an injury that did not exist and had done it in fear for his post, and that he begged the mercy of God and the king and would swear the truth of it on anything they liked. And through it all, on the balcony, Morwenna stood no longer furious now, but very white and very still, watching the platform she had built come apart plank by plank beneath her, watching every prop she had set up walk out from under the thing and leave it standing on nothing but air. Cassius had stopped smiling. Verena had begun, quietly, to cry, and hers were not the pretty rehearsed tears of the sham court but the real kind, the kind that come when a person understands, all at once, exactly how much trouble they are in, and exactly how little of it can be undone. It was into that unraveling, near the middle of the morning, that the great gate bell rang a second time. The king had come home. Gower's southern rider had done his work. But more than that, the king had already been turning north of his own accord, uneasy, 3 days into a visit that some instinct told him to cut short. And when the rider met him on the coast road with a controller's sealed letter describing a struck guard and a sealed door, and a queen governing his household with locksmiths, King Alaric had left his delegation and his baggage and half his escort behind and ridden for Harrogate as though the palace were afire. He came through the gates on a blown horse with a handful of hard-riding men behind him and his traveling cloak gray with dust, and he drew rein in the middle of his own forecourt and looked at the flogging frame by the fountain and the loosed lash on the cobbles, and his sister standing there with a broken seal in her hand, and the guardsman on one knee with his grandson in his arms, and the Queen Consort white on the balcony above, and King Alaric, who was not by nature a loud man, said one word into the silence of that stone square, and it fell like a stone down a well. "Explain." They explained. Adela first, cool and complete, laying the whole of it out in order, the standing order and his own counterseal upon it. The 2 years of turned-away demands, the strike on the landing, the false cry, the confession refused in the cellar, the sham court, the forced doors, the burned copy of the testament, the certified original safe in his own registry, and the late Queen's letter, which Adela now placed into her brother's hands, and which he read standing in the middle of the forecourt with the dust still on his shoulders. I watched the king's face as he read his first wife's foresight of his second wife's crime, and I will not try to set down what was in it, because some griefs are not a stranger's to describe. When he had finished, he folded the letter with great care, as a man folds a thing he means to keep, and he lifted his head, and the uneasy instinct that had ridden him north had become, now, a terrible clarity. He heard the witnesses himself, there in the forecourt, because he said the household that had been made to watch the lie built would watch the truth stand, and every one of them would carry away the right lesson this time. He heard the locksmith and the recanting ladies and the surgeon on his knees. He sent men up to the late Queen's apartments, and they came back and reported the forced lock, the emptied cabinet, and the fresh ashes of burned paper on the cold hearth, exactly as Adela had said. And he called for the boy Torin, the 11-year-old who wanted so badly to be a soldier, because Torin, it emerged, had been on the landing that first afternoon, half hidden behind a pillar, and had seen the whole of it with a child's clear eyes, and had been trying for 3 days to make a grown person listen. The king listened. Torin stood before his grandfather and told it plain and shaking, the glove, the strike, the guard who never moved, the Queen's cry of a blow that was never struck, and he finished by saying in a voice that cracked on the words, "He didn't do anything, grandfather. He just stood there and let her hit him because that's the rule, and then they said he was the one who, and nobody would listen, and they were going to hurt him. Vale never lies. Not ever. Please, I saw asterisk." "I believe you," the king said. "I believe you, and I am ashamed that a child of this house had to fight 3 days to be heard in it. That is on me for leaving it unguarded to the wrong hands. It will not happen twice." Then he turned to the balcony, and he had them bring the Queen Consort, and her son and her daughter, down into the forecourt to stand on the cobbles before the household they had ruled by fear for 3 days, because he said what was to be said would be said in the open, where the wrong had been done. I will not pretend it was a trial with all the slow forms of one. Those came later and were thorough, and I gave my evidence at every stage, roll in hand. But the judgment the king gave that morning in the forecourt was the true reckoning, and it was the most complete humbling of an overreaching soul I have ever witnessed. He did not shout. He did not need to. He stood before his wife with his dead first wife's letter in his coat, and he named her crimes one by one, and each one was heavier than the last. "You struck a guardsman of this household at his lawful post," he said, "and I have 40 witnesses that he never raised a hand to you. That alone I might have called a temper's error and let a quiet apology answer. But you did not stop there. You cried a wound you did not have, and made a surgeon forswear himself to swear to it, and made your own daughter bear false witness, and convened a court that has no lawful power to try a scullion, let alone a guardsman, and used it to condemn an innocent man to the lash, a man who had done nothing but stand where my seal and Isolde's seal set him to stand. And when he would not sign a lie to save his own back, you readied that lash for his flesh anyway, and you built the whole of it, the false blow, the false court, the false verdict for one purpose only, to disgrace the one man standing between you and my dead wife's testament, so that when he cried out what you had stolen, no soul would believe him. You broke a door I sealed with my own hand. You went into the rooms of the mother of my heir, and you put her last testament to the fire, meaning to make yourself the keeper of her grandchildren and the mistress of their fortune over her express and sealed word. He let that hang. Isolde saw you coming 2 years before you came. She lodged the true will where your fire could not reach it, and she gave a letter to a 9-year-old child, and between a dead queen's foresight and a living guardsman's stubbornness and one honest controller's roles, you have accomplished nothing at all, nothing, but to write your own guilt, in your own orders, across 3 days of my household's memory. Every prop you set up has testified against you. You built the gallows and then walked up its steps yourself. Morwenna said nothing. There was, in truth, nothing to say. Every road out had been a thing she had built, and everyone had turned under her. The king's judgment was measured, and lawful and final. He stripped the Queen Consort of all authority over the household and over the persons and property of his grandchildren, from that hour and forever, and he ordered the certified testament of the late queen, Isolde, brought from the registry and read and entered and obeyed in every particular, which meant that the guardianship of Malin, Torin, and Bram, and the management of their great inheritance, passed to Princess Adela and the registry's trustees, exactly as their grandmother had willed it, and exactly as Morwenna had committed a crime to prevent. Lord Cassius, who had directed the locksmith and prosecuted the sham court, was removed from every office and honor he held and put to answer to the king's justice for his part. Sergeant Dunmore was broken from the guard in disgrace, for a guardsman who binds an innocent brother to a post at an unlawful word has forfeited the coat. For the Queen Consort herself, the king did not do the loud thing, the banishment or the dungeon that the balladeers would have preferred. He did the colder and more complete thing. He confined her to her own apartments under guard pending the full process of the law, stripped of the governance she had abused, forbidden the household she had terrorized, her name to stand in the record of Harrogate forever beside the account of what she had done. And he let the certified testament, the surgeon's recantation, and 40 witnesses do the rest, in the slow, sure grind of the king's courts, which do not hurry and do not forget. For Lady Verena there was a mercy, and it was the guardsman's doing as much as the king's. She had borne false witness, and that is a grave thing, but she had also broken and wept true tears when the lie came apart, and when the king asked whether any would speak to her account, it was Silas Vale, still in his shirt sleeves, small Bram's hand in his, who stepped forward and said, in his even voice, "Your Majesty, she is not the architect of this. She is a daughter who did as her mother bade her, in a house where her mother's word was law and her fear was real. Punish the false witness as the law must, but she recanted when it counted, and there are grown men in fine coats here today who did not. I would not have her ruined for the worst hour of her mother's making." The king looked at him a long moment, and then he granted it, Verena to answer for her false witness, but with her recantation weighed in her favor, and no more of the family's ruin visited on her than her own deeds had earned. She wept again at that, and looked at the guardsman she had lied against with something in her face that I think she carried a long while after. And then the king turned to Silas Vale. He came down off his tired stance and crossed the cobbles and stood before the guardsman he had almost come home to find flogged, and for a moment the king of Eldermore did not seem to know what to say to him, which is its own kind of eloquence in a king. "You could have signed their paper," Alaric said at last. 2 nights in a cell and a whipping post at dawn, and all you had to do was say a lie was true. Better men have broken for less. Why did you not?" Vale considered it with the same plain care he gave to everything. "Because the door means the same thing whether your Majesty is home or away," he said. "If it doesn't, it isn't a door, it's just a piece of wood that opens for whoever's winning that night. Her late Majesty set me to guard a thing she trusted to me. I couldn't unmake that with my own name on a paper, sir, not to save my back. If a guard'll lie about the small thing to spare himself, there's no reason to trust him with the great one. I'd rather be flogged an honest guard than walk free a false one." He paused, and then added more quietly, as though it were the simplest observation in the world, "And the children were on the other side of the door, your majesty. That was rather the whole of it in the end." King Alaric was silent for a moment. Then he did a thing that no one in that forecourt had expected, and that was talked of in Eldermore for years after. He inclined his head to the guardsman, a small bow king to guardsmen, the exact courteous degree the rules would have required had their stations been reversed, and he said, "Then I am in your debt, and so is my house, and so are 3 children who slept safe last night because you would not sign your name to a lie. That debt will be paid in the open, where the injury was done." And it was. In the days that followed, when the fuller courts had done their careful work, and every plank of the truth was nailed down past any prizing, King Alaric restored Silas Vale to his post with full honor, and named him, before the assembled household, keeper of the late Queen's apartments. The doors he had guarded made formally his charge, no longer a nameless posting, but an office of trust bearing his name in the rolls in my own hand. The king offered him advancement beyond it, a captaincy, a place in the palace hierarchy, the sort of rise a grateful monarch presses on a man who has served him past the ordinary measure. Vale thanked him and asked, with real humility, to be allowed instead to simply keep his door. "It's what I'm for, sir," he said. "A man ought to do the thing he's for." So they repaired the great lock the locksmith had broken, and forged a new key and broke it in 2 in the old way, and Silas Vale went back up the state stair, and took up his post at the doors of the late Queen Isolde's apartments, lawfully opened now, at last, by the king and the princess together, its true contents read and honored and set right, and then closed again with the guardsmen before them exactly as before, because some things are worth guarding whether or not anyone is trying to take them. I keep the rolls of Harrogate still. I entered every part of this into them, the strike, the false cry, the sham court, the forced door, the burned copy and the surviving original, the judgment, the honors in my own plain hand, dated and witnessed, so that the record of this house says the same thing whoever asks it, on the night the king is home and the night he is away. That was the whole of what the guardsman refused to let be stolen, and it is the whole of what I have spent 19 years keeping. He was right, that plain man in the cellar. Take that from the door, and there is no guard left standing anywhere in the realm. Leave it, and one disciplined man at one quiet post can hold a line that a queen with a palace at her command cannot break, not because he is stronger than she is, but because he will not lie, and the truth, given time and one honest keeper of records and a dead queen's foresight and a child brave enough to keep a 2-year secret, has a way of coming home on a fast horse at the very last hour, just as the lash is about to fall. Small Bram still says good night to him at the door every night before the dark comes. Vale is not supposed to talk on his post. He talks to Bram anyway, just a little when the others have gone. I have decided, as controller and keeper of the rolls of the royal house of Harrogate, that this is one standing order I will never think to enter, and never once enforce. Some doors are only worth guarding because of who stands on the other side of them.